This is one of my favorite projects I have ever made in After Effects, and in just 15 seconds, there are 10 subtle techniques I'm using that you might be missing from your work that you could apply right now to take it to the next level. These are quick, tactical methods with simple effects that reinforce big picture animation concepts. So get your eyes into a comfortable viewing position, and let's begin. Oh, and please do help yourself to a fresh serving of project file down in the description. For these stylized splashes, I used a very neat trick. Here's what it looks like without any effects. First, I drew a spiky crown shape, and then I keyframed its path every 2 frames, just moving the spikes randomly with the pen tool for just 4 different poses, then copied and pasted them to create a loop. Now this can work great for a very simple graphic fire, but to get it rounded for the splash, we can use the effect Simple Choker, which shrinks or expands the edges of your layer, and in doing so, it removes the detail, especially the points. I choked this to -8 to make it bigger, and then added a fill effect to get the same color back. But if you want to keep the same size and just make it more rounded, we could also duplicate that Simple Choker effect and put in the opposite value, which here would be 8. So we have -8 and then 8. And we could dial that in to suit our needs. In the final animation, because I had 2 splashes, I did adjust the keyframes to put them out of sync so that they weren't showing the same shapes at the same time, and it looked less obvious like I just duplicated them. For the streams of blood from the vampire bite, I used CC Particle World. Now, to match this particle system to the designs of those streams, I changed the physics animation to directional axis to get it to point in one direction. I made the producer emitter, which is the point where all the particles come from, as small as I possibly could, just by lowering the radii. I increased the gravity way up and the resistance, and lowered the extra as well. Now, I don't use particles often, so really I was just messing with the settings until it matched the rough shape of the designs. Now, it was important for me to have that stream pulse and vary as the heart contracted, and the particle simulation made that a lot easier and more accurate than doing it by hand, because I could just animate the position of the producer where all the particles are emitted from. So I keyframed the X and Y position of the producer and lined that up with the holes in the heart, and it creates that wonderful wave in the stream as the heart pumps. Now, the edges were still very crunchy, so I used the old Simple Choker technique. I choked it larger to remove the crunch, and then choked it smaller to get it back to the same size and make it a little bit smoother. Then put a fill effect on top and duplicated it. The tip of the producer was still too pointy, so I added back the original design layer and masked out just the top to be visible. Lovely, lovely streams. One of my favorite details are these little splashes when the fangs puncture the heart. Seeing the result of an action makes you feel the impact much, much more. Here it is without the splashes, and it doesn't feel as strong. With those back, now we have something to look at and linger for a second in the result of that action. And we also get a clear visual cue that those fangs really have pierced the flesh, which up until this point, who knows, this could have been a couch cushion. And this splash is just a shape layer with 3 keyframes. With the pen tool, I drew a splash shape that I wanted. I keyframed its path at the height of the splash, and on the first frame that it would be visible after the puncture, I shrank it down, animating its path property, so it looked like a smaller splash. So I've now got 2 poses for the splash, and then about half a second later, made the splash bigger and moved the peaks of the splash moving further outwards, and then just moved the whole thing down under the surface of the heart, and this made it feel like the peaks of the splash would follow an arcing motion. I added a drop in the same way. I drew a rough blob shape, but this time animated its position with 3 keyframes, so it would move in an arcing position across those same timings. I animated its scale going down as well, and I animated its path property very slightly, just making some tiny adjustments every couple of frames, so it felt a little more like a wobbling liquid and not the same static shape. Now, it does look very smooth and kind of motion tweened, but once all the effects are on, we don't really notice it. The lowered frame rate from the posterized time on the effects layer set to 12 frames per second really helps make it feel a bit more like hand-drawn frame-by-frame animation, and we've got a lot of control because we did draw most of the 5 frames so that blood is actually visible for. If you're not super confident with animating shape paths, something like this is a great place to add something a little extra without going full frame-by-frame. Gate weave is a slight, subtle shake over the whole animation that is mimicking the instability of film projection and scanning. And that's caused by mechanical imperfections in the film gate, which is the part that holds the frame still, and that's film gate, not to be confused with the film, the gate.
Someone has opened the gate.
Gate weave is subtle, but you can notice it especially on older titles or graphics, which is really why I love it. It adds a subtle complexity and richness to the motion that makes it seem just a little bit less clean and digital. Now we can create this by adding a transform effect to an adjustment layer, which adds all of our transform properties. And what we want to do with this is move this whole composition's position very slightly, very randomly. And we can do that with a wiggle expression. So I'll Alt or Option click the stopwatch next to position. That'll open up the expression window and we'll just type in wiggle. And then in parentheses, we have to put in two numbers separated by a comma, the frequency and the amplitude. So I'll just put a frequency of 12 and an amplitude of 3, which means it'll change position randomly 12 times a second and up to 3 pixels in either direction. And here's what that looks like. We have gate weave, and you can adjust these values to your own taste. I like these ones because it keeps it subtle and jittery, but still noticeable. This is about as extreme as I would go, but you can weave more at your own risk. Now, because this is on an adjustment layer, at the very edge of our composition, it will start wiggling it away from the edge, but it's very easy to combat this. I just like to go to the scale property in that transform effect and change it from 100 to 101. That makes everything a tiny bit bigger and covers it up. Unless you have an absurdly large wiggle, but at that point, you've got bigger problems.
You got demons.
And if you want extra gate, you could even copy that transform effect and paste it onto an individual layer, like our title here. So now it and the background are weaving independently. It creates a tiny bit of separation from the smallest amount of parallax possible, but now the motion is doubled, so it is twice as intense. So we might need to dial that back a bit, just so it doesn't feel like we are mainlining Earl Grey freebase. Now, why that gate weave helped a lot with this puncture scene in particular is because it adds a subtle tension to the motion. That shake kind of feels like the pressure from the fangs against the heart right before it pierces is kind of causing them both to shake with that tension. Now, I didn't end up using this, but I experimented with adding an additional layer of gate weave just to ramp up this tension in here even more. So on a new adjustment layer that we will call shake, because we always label our layers, I pasted that same transform effect. I ramped up the wiggle's amplitude to 12 and I trimmed that layer to right before the pierce happens and made it last about half a second. And now you can feel it even more, it's even more exaggerated. Now it's probably a bit too much here, but if you'd like to do the same, but make it more controlled, we can animate that on a null that is attached to everything. And we can keyframe its position property, and then maybe every other frame, just nudge it slightly in any direction, and then slightly increase the amount you're nudging it as we get closer to the puncture, and they get more erratic. So now that shake builds up over time. Again, this is way too exaggerated, but now we have complete control. And to make it subtler, we can pull these positions closer to the center. There, that feels a little more natural. Another extra bit of path animation was this drop of blood falling from the fang. Now, I've used this technique before to animate drops of melted ice cream, and I'll show you on an ice cream that I've got set up. First, we're just going to animate the position of a circle dropping. We'll start a little bit away from the ice cream and then have it dropping out of frame. There we go. I'll easy ease that first keyframe with F9 so it accelerates a little bit as it drops, and we'll work backwards to create that main dripping shape. So I'll deselect that layer, select the pen tool, and start drawing to create a new shape layer. And I'm going to try to create a drippy shape and kind of trace over our existing circle to try to match its position. There, that looks pretty good. I'll adjust it slightly to get it as smooth as possible and make sure those shapes blend into whatever it's dripping from, here, an ice cream. And then we'll keyframe that shape's path right here where it overlaps our circle, and we'll trim the end of that layer to finish right there. And we'll also trim the start of that circle layer to start there as well. Now, maybe a second before this, let's keyframe it again. And this time we want to move all of these points up to align with our existing ice cream. Move them up roughly first. I am also going to move them all further outwards as well and try to make them roughly equal in distance. I'll grab the Convert Vertex tool to make smoothing these out much quicker. And because we spread those vertices out evenly, it all feels like they're pulling downwards into that one single drop. Now it's almost done, it's just a little bit snappy when that drop falls. So let's extend that layer a little bit more, and we can copy that first keyframe of our smooth ice cream, and we'll paste that maybe 2 seconds later this time. So now we have that drip forming back up into our spherical ice cream, which doesn't look right. So let's add a keyframe immediately after our circle appears and starts dropping down, and then go in to adjust these points to make it look like that mass of the drop has just been removed. And we can flick back and forth between those two frames to see where things are kind of moving around a bit and just smooth those out. There we go, we kind of just want it to feel like this section here is disappearing and everything else is staying as still as possible. There, that feels much smoother. And the blood drop is even simpler than this because it falls off the fang completely. It is just a circle falling down, and then I have this layer which is parented to the fangs, and it's just a V shape that forms a bubble at the end over the last 2 frames. And then that layer ends as soon as the circle comes on and takes over the drop. Now that drop also adds a nice bit of eye trace. Eye tracing is how animators direct the path of the viewer's eyes to guide them to what we want them looking at. Here it's directing the path of the viewer's eye downwards. So we start with the main motion following the fangs upwards, then this drop becomes our main motion and we start to follow it down. And whilst our eyes are down here, maybe we're noticing the holes slightly shrink before the streams pour out. Eye tracing like this helps keep what's happening on screen clear. The other 2 shots are very static. This is the only shot where things are leaving and entering the scene. So that drip was a nice device to keep the eyes on the action. Really, in every shot that you make, you should know what the most important thing is that you want the audience to see and understand. If there's too much going on, they might miss what's important while they're trying to catch something not important, distracting them over in the corner. We solve that by having a clear hierarchy of what the most important things in the shot are. I want to show you these amazing frames that use hierarchy in their composition incredibly well. These are designed by Greta Radzevachute for their major project in my course Design Breakthrough Art for Motion. I really love how this frame in particular tells a story so quickly and cleverly. It's organic jam made from real strawberries. Immediately with the most saturated shapes and the highest contrast we are drawn here, strawberries. Then led down here, they squish into jam. Clear hierarchy. 1, strawberries. 2, jam. 3, the background character. Color has much lower contrast, so it is less important. But designs like this don't appear out of thin air. They were built with a process, with mood boards, with storyboarding, and experimenting. Greta also created many other amazing designs throughout the course. I love how these ones use shape language and composition so well to create a contrasting sense of stress and calm. If you want to level up your design and animation skills, I teach all of my courses with practical projects and processes like these. You can also access bonus content and save 20% when you bundle 2 or more together. Enroll now at bedmarriott.com. Here's a tip for creating stars or any other symmetrical shape. So I'm in a square composition and I'm going to hit Control or Command R to drag out our rulers because we're going to drag out some guides onto here. First, I'll turn on Title Action Safe so I can see where the middle is. I'm going to click and drag this ruler to drag one perfectly into the middle horizontally. I'll get a little closer to line that up, and then one on the left to get it vertically. There, turn these guides off now, and the rulers. Now with the pen tool, I want to draw part of a star up in this left quadrant, and we don't need to be too precise yet. Then we are going to add the mirror effect to replicate this in the other quadrants. I'm going to grab the reflection center and drag that right to the very center, and we've got it reflected. Now we can just duplicate that mirror effect again. The reflection center still right in the middle, so we just need to increase the reflection angle to 90 degrees. And now our shape is reflected perfectly symmetrically. We can grab our pen tool and we can adjust everything here. We can make our star more pointy. We can make it a little bit more chunky, make it more tall than it is wide. It is really quick, really easy to adjust and experiment. And we can even animate that shape property to create something quite hypnotic. If we wanted to go really crazy, we could even try stacking more mirror effects up here, changing the reflection angle again, and moving the center around to create some more interesting wild shapes, and then have some fun with those. Music and sound effects have a huge impact in your animation. I am not a professional sound designer, so I don't think my sound design here is brilliant by any means, but it certainly enhances it, and it's a fun process. For my YouTube videos, I do all the sound in Premiere, just dragging in clips and adding a few effects, and that works fine for what I need it to do there. For this project, I used Ableton Live because I wanted to add some simple synths to score it as well. I use sound effects that I got from Epidemic Sound. I have an account there where I get the music to use in my YouTube videos, and they have sound effects as well, so it works great for me. There are plenty of other options available. Going to freesound.com is a perfectly great place to start. Even recording your own just using your phone. And even without sound effects, you can find a music track you think suits your project and animate to that, ideally choosing the music before you animate so you can really enhance the timings. It can do a lot of heavy lifting for a scene, really enhancing the mood, and also keeping the audience engaged if there isn't much animation happening on screen. Which one of these do you think has the most impact? Now, my favorite detail in the sound design here is that I filtered the heartbeat to sound like it went underwater when the heart was fully submerged. It is barely noticeable in the full mix, and I wouldn't really expect anyone else to pick up on it, but I know it's there, and that's enough. And now you know, so that's at least twice as enough. Now, I love to spend the time to get the tiny details just right on a project. My favorite part of the process is working over multiple layers of feathered masks to get the reflected light and the subtle ripples just right in the shot. Individually, any one of these details are not essential, but together I really think they make the animation. At the end of the day, this animation is a heart scaling up and down with a red rectangle getting higher up the frame. It is not technically complex at all, but all those little touches, the splashes, the shadows, the sound design, the attention to detail that I really enjoy is what takes this beyond those bare bones. And these do take time. And I know that is a luxury we rarely have on client projects. For years, I was so used to churning out quick animations for clients that I started to think that all animation must be made that quickly and rushed out the door because there was no time to plan or play or storyboard anything other than the first thing that came to mind, because any time spent thinking was time not spent animating. It wasn't until I freelanced at Buck that I really learned just how much time, care, and attention goes into everything. The design, the animatic, before even the final animation starts. The real value that great motion designers have is in their thinking and in their ability to craft the best possible result. It is not in how fast they can churn out slop. Now more than ever, when the bare minimum is getting easier and easier and the bar is just getting lower and lower. Taking shortcuts might seem like the best way to get ahead, but in my experience that is just not the case. In order to show what you are capable of and make your best work, you need to take extra time. So I would encourage you, for your next personal project, do give yourself extra time to consider those details, and I really think you will enjoy the process and the results even more. And if you want to dive even deeper, you should watch this video, and to enroll in my courses, go to benmarriott.com to learn more. It is the most ruthless, tootinous place for motion design on the whole internet. Yeehaw! This video is now cowboy themed right at the end. You can't stop me.